Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to PNP Live at Lunch. I'm Heidi Lewis from Politics and Prose Bookstore in Washington, D.C., and I am coming to you live from my dining room in Silver Spring, Maryland. I've ushered my two small children and husband out of the house. I don't know, they may be barreling back in, and we may find ourselves in an episode of BBC Dad doing a live interview with his children underfoot, but let's hope not. Because I'm so delighted to be here to welcome authors Lise Van Susteren and Stacey Colino, authors of the new book, Emotional Inflammation: Discover Your Triggers and Reclaim Your Equilibrium During Anxious Times. And what a timely discussion this is. Anxious times just about sums it up. And as with all of our Live at Lunch programs, which are uniquely designed to help you thrive and find meaning, today's event is particularly relevant to the uncertain times that we find ourselves in. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today and learning more about the restorative tactics outlined in this important, valuable book, a book that's been called, and I want to read this quote directly, a transformational roadmap to staying grounded in turbulent times, in the press. Now, before I introduce the authors and bring them up, I just wanted to see a show of hands. How many of you are here for the first time? Just kidding. I can't see you. If you're raising your hand at home, I love you, I am you. But actually, what I want to do is hear from you. So if you see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat bar. Everyone is very welcome to join in and chat, say hello. Let us know if this is your first PNP virtual event. If so, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Maria. And this chat will be ongoing throughout the event. So please use that as a way to connect with each other and to deepen your experience with the authors today. And another important way to do that is to ask a question. So look down at the bottom of your screen. If it's not showing up, hover your cursor over the Ask a Question button and put your questions into that box. This is so important because these authors are really here for us today, and we're bringing this event to you, especially in these difficult times. And we want you to get as much out of this event as you possibly can. And we are so lucky to have these two with us today to do just that. So please ask questions. You can do it any time, and the authors will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll pivot to your questions. And if you're feeling shy and you just want to look at what other people are posting, you can upvote people's questions just to make sure they get to the ones that you really want to hear answered. Oh my goodness, look at all these people here for the first time. Thank you. Jack Goodman, Suzanne Bays, Nikki Sterios. Hello. Okay, so we've gone over the chat. You know how to ask a question. And the most important thing is let's address technical issues. We're in a wild time. Everyone's on the internet. We may have glitches today. Let's hope not. But if we do, if something happens to your sound or your video, refresh your browser. And we have found that Firefox and Chrome are the best web browsers to use for these events. So if you're in a different internet browser and something happens, close out, get back in, use Chrome, and we'll still be here. And if all else fails, we will have a recording of this event on our YouTube channel, or you can rewatch it through the Crowdcast page. You can come back in and click the replay link. And we're able to bring you programs like this for free because of your loyal support and because of just your hearts and minds being with Politics and Prose right now. And we so value your commitment to our bookstore, and we've made it very easy for you to purchase today's book by clicking on the green button at the bottom of the page that says Purchase Emotional Inflammation from Politics and Prose. So click that, buy the book, send it to someone perhaps who may really need this message right now, and we will be so grateful for your support. I'm going to bring the authors on screen now, and we're going to get started. Thank you again to everyone for tuning in. We're so excited to see all of you. And I'm delighted to welcome Stacey Colino. who is an award-winning writer specializing in health and psychology and a certified health coach. I'm going to bring Stacey up here. Hi, Stacey.
Hi there. Thanks for coming, everybody.
And I'm also going to welcome Lise Van Susteren, MD, a psychiatrist in private practice and a climate activist in Washington, D.C. You may have seen her on CNN, NBC, or heard her on NPR, or read her in the Wall Street Journal, Huffington Post, Mind, Body, Green, or many other media outlets. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Heidi. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to let you two take it away, and I'll be back in about 35 minutes or so to guide everyone through a Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It goes through my mind that you all have such busy social schedules. So we're especially appreciative that you're here today. We have three sort of, I think, main objectives, and one is that you would have an hour with us that you found enjoyable, worthwhile, that you learned something. And the second goal is that we would like you to understand emotional inflammation and recognize that so many of the feelings that you're having are absolutely normal and a response to abnormal conditions. And third of all, we'd like you to, of course, buy the book, but especially Stacey and I, in writing this book, was a very joyful, mostly, experience. And we hope that you look at this book and not only buy it, we're thankful if you do that, but that you reread it. There are a lot of really, I would say, important messages in this. And both Stacey and I have looked at each other over and over again and commented on how much we have gotten out of this in really hearing what it is that we have aggregated for you, the sort of wisest lessons and newest research on how we can lower our emotional inflammation. So two things, of course, we want to talk about why we wrote this book and a little bit more about, of course, how we came together. So I'm going to propose to Stacey that she pick up where she thinks it would be most interesting for her and for you. Stacey?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So I'll start by explaining how Lisa and I met, because we didn't know each other until just a few years ago. I'm a regular writer for U.S. News and World Report. And at the time, I was writing a series of regular wellness articles for the website and working on an article about anticipated trauma, basically the equivalent of PTSD before a traumatic event occurs. And research had found that climate activists were experiencing this, as well as soldiers on the verge of deployment before they actually got deployed. So Lisa and I met when I was working on that article, and she was a fabulous interview, no surprise there. And we just kept talking. And as the conversation continued, we found that we were very kindred spirits and like-minded in a lot of ways, in terms of what we were noticing around us, how people were suffering and feeling agitated all the time, and really wanting to do something to help people. And that's how the idea behind this book was born.
And I will add that Stacey is a real pro. She has written, what, a dozen books, Stacey? Is that how many books you're at this point? And I, of course, had not. I was thinking about writing a book, but it was always going to be started tomorrow or after the first of the year or something like that. And nothing would have happened without Stacey moving this along. And, of course, her ability with words and her ability to structure things and all the rest. But I will say that when she first said, should we write a book, she made a decision, I think, based on all of her experience. I was thinking to myself, well, geez, isn't this sort of like, we've only just been dating and we're kind of asking to get married. So it took me a while, a few more coffees at Barnes and Noble here in Bethesda and some at the house. And pretty soon I knew that it was really a wonderful relationship. And it just took off very organically, didn't it?
It did. It really did.
Yeah. So I don't want to put too much emphasis on the sort of takeaways here, But I think it is important, and that's why we wrote the book. We hope that it's fun for you to read, but there are certain issues that we would like you to walk away from after this event, really understanding. The book is in 3 parts, and the first part is all about you understanding what emotional inflammation is. And I'm going to let Stacey is particularly adept at talking about that. And what happens to you when you do become emotionally inflamed. And then the really fun for me part, which is all of the bounty of remedies that we have that are right low-hanging fruit, and all we have to do is reach out and pick off that low-hanging fruit. And then last of all, it's the section, it's just a chapter, but it's a really important one. It's turning what we know, what we have learned, into what we do. So, Stacey, do you want to talk a little bit about what emotional inflammation is?
Sure. So I think of it, we're all familiar with the fight or flight response. When we sense danger or when we're under extreme stress, we get revved up. Stress hormones course through our bodies, our heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases, we might start breathing more quickly. I think of emotional inflammation as the stress response getting stuck in the on position, but at a fairly low level so that we don't even realize it's happening. And the repercussions of that can be manyfold. We can feel slightly agitated or angsty all the time. We can have a pervasive sense of dread. We can feel sort of agitated and needing to do something to change the conditions. Or we can actually feel withdrawn and turn inward because we can't deal with these feelings and the triggers that are eliciting them. So that's the way I look at it. You may want to add to that, Lisa.
Well, I think it's well said. And oftentimes we find, and of course, in my professional experiences, many of the challenges that we face are sort of like a Rorschach. It brings out different parts of ourselves. And this is a really important fact. And I think it helps us to become more tolerant of each other. You'll see the different reactor types that Stacey was referring to. And when we understand that we have different reactor types, it can really help us. It's helped me immensely to be more patient. And I say that, and my husband's probably laughing if he's listening to this. But it does help us to understand that our particular reactor types can rub people the wrong way. And also it helps us to better understand our own reactor types and how, or rather other people's reactor types, because sometimes, you know, that's the combination that can really be a problem. If there's one thing we know the world needs, it's more understanding and tolerance of each other's differences. So one of the reasons that these ideas were rattling around in my head for so long, other than the climate crisis, which has consumed me really for the last decade or more, is that I have seen a parade of patients in the last probably 10 years, and they've changed. It's not the, I'm, you know, couples therapy, family stuff, my kids, whatever. It's really this sense of alienation and unease that has grown and actually skyrocketed recently. People coming in saying that they can't sleep, they can't wake up, they think they've got ADD, and there is a feeling that the world is not right, but they can't figure out exactly what the problem is. Some people don't even know that they have anxiety, and you have to kind of press them for it. Or if they know they have anxiety, they sure can't say why. And this feeling of dread and foreboding, or a feeling that things are off, you know, it's not a good thing for people to be experiencing, because of course I see individuals, but this is how society ultimately is composed. It's the cumulative toll of what individuals are feeling. This needs to be addressed. Stacey?
It's interesting because several people have said that, have called this book prescient, and said it's so timely for the coronavirus pandemic, which it is. And yet we conceptualized this book and wrote this book years before anyone had ever heard of the novel coronavirus. And so, yes, it's timely, and yes, it's incredibly apt for the pandemic that we're currently living through. But if everybody sort of thinks back to a year or two ago, we were experiencing different types of fatigue and agitation. We were reading in the news all the time about outraged fatigue and evacuation fatigue in the face of so-called natural disasters, apocalypse fatigue, scandal fatigue, racial battle fatigue. So the problems that have been in our country and in the world at large have been triggering this extra layer of stress and agitation and dread and foreboding, in addition to our everyday stressors. So it's almost like layers. And that's what I think is different about emotional inflammation from everyday stress.
That's a really good point, because some people will say, well, how is this different from the anxiety that any of us has ever felt? The anxiety that we have felt in the past, I believe, is very different from the kind of existential feelings. And I don't want to get too heavy here, because as we're talking about the problem, it does really remind me that of the abundance, and wanting to pivot to the abundance again of solutions and remedies. And some of these are age old. We know in ancient Greece and before that, that the wisest people were telling us that we needed to get out in nature, engage in nature. And they talked about the healing effects of nature. In 18th, 19th century Britain, there was something called the Lunacy Act, where all patients were afforded a certain amount of, when they were in a hospital, of green space, because then they could better heal. So we have an abundance of healing opportunities that I think technology, and Stacey and I have talked about this, where that nature has, in a way, for some people almost come across as the X, that technology has been a smooth talking, fast car driving, entertaining, take you anywhere boyfriend or girlfriend, that we have become dazzled by, but can never make an emotional commitment to us. So here we are now in the age of the coronavirus, and people are flooding now out into nature, and they're recognizing, but not understanding exactly why. And this is why I really love our book, because it tells you what is happening to you physiologically that does make you feel so much more calm, so much more tranquil. And I'll just say parenthetically that it activates reward centers being out in nature. And from the reward centers, it activates even our opioid receptors. That's our natural painkillers. So we do have this feeling of peace and calm. So it's really something that is very dear and important to us. And we see now with coronavirus that in addition to this connection to nature is this connection to each other, the emotional connection to each other, and actually touching each other. And Stacey and I have had a lot of fun talking about a hormone called oxytocin, which some of you may have heard of. Stacey, you want to take it away on oxytocin or anything else?
Well, so people tend to think of oxytocin as the love hormone or the cuddle hormone. It's best known for being stimulated when a mother nurses her baby or cuddles with her baby. But actually, we all experience oxytocin on a daily basis when we hug our loved ones, when we hug people who we trust and who support us, when we cuddle with our pets, or even look into our dog's eyes. Amazingly enough, research has shown that recently. And that is just incredible. And it does have this very calming effect for both us and for our dogs, believe it or not. And it's incredibly valuable. And I don't think it's a coincidence that during the pandemic, dog adoption rates have skyrocketed. I think this is one reason why, because people are craving that sense of calm and stability and that soothing sensation. But I want to sort of segue a little bit, Lisa, because recently you referred to the Restore plan in our book as a menu, which I just loved, because it has prescriptive elements, but it doesn't tell you, okay, you must do this, you must do that, you must do the other thing. There is a whole menu of things that you can choose to do to honor your body's circadian rhythms, to take better care of yourself physically. And self-care is a huge part of calming emotional inflammation. And by that, I'm referring to diet, eating anti-inflammatory foods, probiotics, prebiotics, exercising regularly, which we all know that exercise is supposed to supposedly releases tension, relieves anxiety, depression, and so on. But in addition to that, it actually helps buffer us from the effects of stress, thanks to, you're going to remember the name better, BDNF.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Yes, which basically has an effect that's almost like putting on a raincoat. You can go out in the rain and your raincoat will still get wet, but it won't penetrate the raincoat and get you wet underneath. And what happens with exercise is you'll still experience stress. It'll still come at you. It's unavoidable in this world, but it won't be able to land on your stress receptors. So you won't react to it. And that is just, to me, a golden rule.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that we are in this now era of lockdown. We are doing naturally or complaining about so many of the things that are showing what we know instinctively, because this is a part of our evolutionary history. And we have forgotten really so much by moving essentially indoors about how we were designed by nature. We are a part of nature. The sounds of nature, the sights of nature, the smells of nature.
Absolutely.
And we, in our book, describe how the sounds of nature calm us down. The man-made, human-made sounds are agitating. And the sounds of nature, brain scans show this. We don't have to imagine it anymore. We're doing it automatically now, but they calm us down. Certain scents, like they're called phytoncides, being outside and smelling certain scents, improve our immune function, believe it or not. They improve our cognitive, our ability to think. And of course, the sights of the green, the fractals, the shapes that look very orderly. Our brain tells us this is a safe place. This is an orderly place. I will be okay here. Contrast that with Times Square, which is very stimulating, but it tells us why in this moment when we are stressed out, how important it is to return to the idea of restoring nature, the engagement of nature in our lives. And one last point about nature is that it not only being exposed and being out in our natural world, it not only boosts creativity, but interestingly, it also boosts our sense of altruism. We're more likely to be generous. We're more likely to forget about ourselves in favor of the feeling of being a part of something bigger. Awe, which is the emotion like no other in creating so many beneficial effects to our health.
And in terms of awe and being in nature, there are so many ways to stimulate that emotion. You can do it by looking at fractals, as you suggested, gazing at the night sky and looking at the stars, just noticing new birds and forms of wildlife around you that you haven't appreciated before. It sort of puts things in perspective and makes you feel a part of something bigger than yourself, as you suggested. But it also just induces this sense of reverence and respect for things that are not man-made, that aren't created by us. And that has a soothing quality.
Indeed. And I don't think either one of us can pronounce that word that refers to being mesmerized by the night sky. But Stacey shared with me the other day when we've talked about, and we do this a lot, where we'll sort of focus on something in particular about the book. Obviously, we've gone over this so many times, which is why I say we hope you buy the book. But if you do, read it and reread it, because as we have gone over these particular bits of information, which again, like, thank you, Stacey, like a menu, we have found that we have new places that inspire us, that excite us, that give us joy. And I will say that when we were writing this book, it was an extraordinarily, well, mostly, we only had 10% of the time where we actually experimented with remote meeting ahead of everybody. Remember, Stacey, when we decided that maybe a little separation would be good. It was a very intense experience, but what an incredible experience it was to find all these magnificent ways that we can feel better. And for Stacey, one of the things that she's recently brought up is what it was like, and is now, as you've said, Stacey, going out with family members and gazing at the night sky. And you'll see about a very good friend of mine wrote about sleep and how sleep is completely different now from how it was in the past, and maybe a factor in why we sometimes why we have skyrocketing problem with insomnia, because of that gazing at the night sky does have a mesmerizingly calming effect on us. And you look at it and you think to yourself, imagine all the ages before us that are doing just what we're doing now, looking at that moon, wondering what's out there. Is there something out there? And we have plenty of reasons to believe that there is. And some will say it's exoplanets with other civilizations. Other people will conceive of it as some other way. But that wonderment may be why our society now is turning increasingly to mindfulness and transcendental meditation as a way to calm our spirits. We have certainly found that that's true of us.
In addition, you've touched on something that's really important, Lisa. That is about sort of calming our minds, not just our bodies and our entire beings. But one of the beautiful things about meditation, whatever form you choose, is that it actually has a very calming effect on your mind. And in addition to that, we explored at length different forms of what I like to call healthy thought control, which is about not letting your mind run away with you and your fears and your anxieties, but learning to tame them. And there are all kinds of different ways to do that. One of the things that I've done through this pandemic and even before this is I've put myself on what I like to call a media diet. I read the news in the newspaper on paper first thing in the morning, and then that's it for the day. I don't check news feeds. I don't constantly stay up to date because I don't need to know every little detail by the minute. It's enough. I find it agitating to have too much information. And I think it's important for all of us to sort of safeguard that threshold for ourselves. In addition, we can use techniques to stop our fears from running away with us. Sometimes if I wake up in the middle of the night worrying about something, I will consciously say to myself quietly, so I don't wake anybody else up, I don't need to think about this right now. I'm on a thought vacation. And I have trained myself to literally roll over and go back to sleep. And learning these tools is so incredibly important. Somebody asked a question on the right side of our screen about tips for falling asleep and getting back to sleep. I think one of the things that's difficult, and I read this in the paper the other day, is people are sleeping more during the pandemic, but they're not sleeping well and they're waking up tired. And I think part of that is the incessant worry that we're all experiencing about when is this pandemic going to be over? What is the new normal going to look like on the other side? But in addition to that, the fact that we're all so glued to our screens every single day, even in the evenings when we're catching up with friends or doing Zoom happy hours or coffee dates, we are exposing ourselves to this blue light well into the evening and essentially resetting our circadian rhythms, delaying the release of melatonin, which makes it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. So our reliance, our increasing reliance on technology is a double-edged sword here, because on the one hand, it keeps us connected and stems the sense of loneliness and alienation. But on the other side, it's messing with our rhythms.
Very good point. I just remembered I wanted to read something. I'm mindful of the time, and I wanted to read just a short portion from the book. It's the last chapter, which one could argue is probably, well, I guess we don't have to say which one is the most important one, but the idea is
They're all important.
They're all important.
They are.
But it's taking what we have learned and turning it into what we do. So the last chapter is Exercise Your Power. The effects of living in a continuous state of high alert, helplessness, or restlessness can seep down into our deeper consciousness with destabilizing influences on our social interactions, on our psyches, and our souls. When there are big problems, as there are with many of the societal and global issues that contribute to emotional inflammation, and no one has easy answers, it's natural to wonder, is there anything that I can do personally that really matters? The answer is a resounding yes, for your own well-being and for the world at large. Taking any action to help make the world a more humane and equitable place can have a profound effect on your own sense of well-being and empowerment. But there's more. Indeed, one of the most effective antidotes to the frustration and sense of helplessness that many of us are feeling is to roll up your sleeves and take action in some way. In his famous Nicomachean Ethics, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle declared that we reach our highest purpose and our full potential when we fill our lives with meaningful action and pursue that action with what he called arete, a passion to do it well. For Aristotle, this reflects moral virtue. Taking action provides us with a sense of control. We can take the energy of our fears, anger, and sorrow and redirect it into working to change the conditions, including upstream, that fuel our anxieties, often finding the comfort of like-minded people at our side. And our individual actions, never forget, are counted together. If ever there was a time when we need to change course collectively, this is it. So, Stacey, I don't know if you want to comment on that. I know that we have talked about these issues at length and about how important it is for our collective action. And this is something that I think we referred to earlier. Even brain scans show that when you focus from your individual action, which is helpful, but if we get too focused on ourselves and what we're doing, it can cause us to ruminate, even to become depressed. And when we do this with others, and obviously right now there's some hurdles, but there's still an awful lot, and I'm going to bring something up in a second, that we can do collectively. It goes to the other side of the brain, and that other side of the brain turns us from looking inward to looking outward, and that is the magic sauce. And I'll just say, I'm going to give a shout out to my wonderful sister-in-law, Viva Kempner, who actually had such a great idea and did something that reminded me a little bit of this. She gave some certificates, to the staff at Safeway, and encouraged them to go across the street to a number of the restaurants that line our avenue nearby, so that she then helped the gift certificates. She then helped both the staff and showed her appreciation to the staff, and she helped the restaurants that we all have come to love and are a part of our community. And this is an example. If you think creatively, there are so many ways that we can become a part of something bigger. And of course, once we get out of this particular place that we're in with treatments, vaccines, et cetera, there's an awful lot of work to be done, clearly, going forward. So are we looking for Heidi? I think we're at there we are. Hi, Heidi.
Hi. Yes, I was just about to pop back on. Thank you so much. This has felt very calming, which I think is, from what I can see in the comments, just so needed. Before I get to the questions that people have thrown into the ask a question box, I want to give everyone one last chance to put their questions in. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the quiz that you have in your book, because I think what makes your book so different and so important and accessible is that you're not only giving techniques for how to deal with this overstimulation, this sort of fired up response that we get to anxiety. I love that you have this quiz where you help people right from the jump identify what type of response you have to stress. Could you talk about that quiz and maybe ask us some of the questions from it?
Well, one of us should be digging up the questions, but
well, I'll start by describing the different reactor types. So there are 4, and very few of us are 100% one type or another. Most of us are hybrids, or we might be primarily one type and then have twinges of qualities from the other types. So one type is a nervous reactor, and that's somebody who has sort of the anxious, worried, or fearful form of emotional inflammation. You might be finding your mind swimming with unnamed threats or fears. You might be traveling down rabbit holes, catastrophizing in your thoughts and worries, or thinking about, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And all of that kind of thing. Another one is called a revved up reactor, which is somebody who becomes almost frantic, maybe slightly manic, and hyper-reactive with their inflammation. When things get to them and they get very worried or fearful about things, they want to swing into the action immediately and try to fix it, which is very noble. But sometimes, as we all know, you just can't fix things right away. And so in that case, it can be sort of spinning your wheels less than effectively. The third one is called a molten reactor. And that is when somebody's emotional inflammation is marked by irritation, maybe even anger or indignation and frustration. Like, how the heck did we let things get this bad? How did people let this happen? And it makes us angry. I confess to having a little bit of that. The fourth one is a retreating reactor. When somebody's emotional inflammation flares up, they might be tempted to withdraw, freeze, or detach and turn inward. Maybe zone out, maybe do something to numb themselves. And it's basically a bit of an avoidance technique. On the one hand, it's very adaptive and functional because you're trying to protect yourself, but it can spiral into less than helpful behavior as well.
The question often comes up, Stacey, I know you referred to it. Thank you. I think that was an excellent review of those different reactor types. Do we want to talk about what reactor types we are?
You go first.
All right. I admit to being kind of the Revved reactor, jamming in way more things than I can possibly handle, occasionally seeing them splat to the floor, and being confused about why things aren't delivered always on time the way that they were expected. But it's my way of trying to deal with what I see as around me. And the feelings that I have. And then what will happen sometimes is that then I get the fantasy, okay, I'm moving to Vermont. It's the retreating side, or maybe Vermont isn't far enough. I got to find an island in Maine, or maybe the Azores. Nobody can even get to the Azores. So we do have, I think as Stacey referred, elements of many, and certainly there's a molten, a drizzle of molten in me. But those are the kinds of reactor types that I think are characteristic of me. And I'll also add that it has been immensely helpful in understanding that if you are a revved reactor, And when you're with a person who might be retreating reactor, it doesn't mean that they're not doing things. They might be doing things that just aren't as noisy as what you're doing, but you can feel really frustrated with each other. But if you say to yourselves, well, wait, this is the way this person is reacting, it's unbelievable how it can turn the temperature down on the friction and build up the tolerance and appreciation for differences.
So how do you recommend that the different reactor types respond to anxieties and triggers? Is your plan different for each type?
Well, at the very end of the book, we actually have specific suggestions for which measures each reactor type should start with. There are certain things like honoring your circadian rhythms that we should all be doing regardless of our reactor types. Setting a consistent bedtime and awakening time, modulating our exposure to light, dimming the lights in the evening so we don't delay the release of melatonin, that kind of thing. But in addition, there are very specific things that people with different reactor types should be doing to really tend to themselves most effectively. And those are elucidated at the end of the book. One thing I wanted to say in response to what Lisa said is there's power and comfort in understanding what your reactor type or hybrid is. First of all, self-knowledge is always a good thing. It can help you understand why you're feeling so unsettled or agitated or however you may be feeling at any given time. And then it can help you find better solutions or remedies to calm those feelings. But in addition to that, once you understand how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, we also have a chapter on identifying your triggers. You can then take steps to either avoid some of those triggers, perhaps sidestep them, or mitigate their effect on you. And that's powerful too. One of the things that I have found consistently when I tell people, editors, colleagues, friends, family members, and so on about this book is when I describe the title and the subtitle, they say, oh, emotional inflammation. What is that? I think I have it, before they even know what it is. And I think that this concept has brought great comfort and is often met with a real aha moment where people feel like, okay, now I have a name for the way I've been feeling. And that makes me feel better and more normal right now. And that is of immense comfort.
Right. Right. And we know that, like joints over time pressing against each other can get inflamed. We know that this is an actual physical response that our body can have, but then to think about it in our brains and with our emotions, it just really helps crystallize what's happening and how we can attack it.
And let me add that if any of my colleagues may be on, but one of the things that we have seen, and I like my prescription pad very much, and I reach for it often, especially when somebody comes in for the first time, because it really can help a person in the short term acutely. But we have become, and I don't know what percentage of people are taking medications, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, anti-anxieties, and all the rest. And they feel like makes them feel like there's something wrong with them, like they're sick, and they're not quite right. And that's become now part of our culture, even to be taking medicine. But it should, and I'm saying this to my colleagues as well, it should spawn an internal conversation about why so many people need to be on medication. If everybody's got ADD, if nobody can sleep, I'm exaggerating, but if all of these things are so common, what do we need to change about our society? And these questions are important ones, because society isn't going to change unless we collectively urge it in that way. And it's only with knowledge, our self-knowledge, and the willingness that we have to take action on what we've learned that is going to set the social norms. In other words, what becomes normal behavior. The only way that's going to happen is if we do ask these questions of ourselves and become determined to make these changes.
Well, let's get to some of these questions here. So let's see. Do you have any suggestions or the news junkie like myself who finds it hard to turn off, but recognizes that news overload is definitely adding to my increased level of anxiety?
Stacey, you got to take that. That's your favorite.
Okay. Turn it off. Just force yourself, put yourself on a schedule. If you really can't stop checking news feeds during the day, at least limit it. Say I'll check it at 7 a.m. when I'm having my coffee and my breakfast, maybe again at noon, and then maybe again at 5 o'clock. And then that's it. You have to set a limit, because otherwise it gets into your skin, gets under your skin, into your psyche, and it just becomes too agitating, and you don't need that much information. Things are not changing so dramatically minute to minute, hour to hour, that it's going to change what you do in your life. So you don't need all that information and all those updates. And, if you look at it a different way, this is really just a matter of habit for you. And
I'll weigh in, because that's not a good one. That's not one that I'm good at. I have a certain degree of FOMO, fear of missing out. And so, and I'm thinking to myself, I have not yet, it takes a while sometimes for some of our recommendations, I think, to really, as I've seen with patients, you have to hear something 100 times. And on the 101st time, the person says, I was thinking over the weekend. And so I say to myself, and I've heard Stacey say this, we do recognize that not all of these changes are easy. But that's why we say, read this again and again. It's really important to hear these messages. And for a person who is kind of revved up, for me, it's a constant source of a way to focus myself. But that's not a good way to focus. It's by bringing things down that we focus, not by getting ourselves more agitated. So these are valuable lessons, but and know that we have to hear it again and again.
It looks like we might be having a technical issue. Can you still hear and see me?
Yes.
We can't see you, but we can hear your lovely voice.
Okay. Well, I'll just read the next question then. As someone who is living alone and without pets, I really miss simply being touched. How about people who are 100% alone right now?
Well, I can address that. They're not doing, a lot of people who are very alone are very depressed. Early on, I remember seeing a joke going around that was supposedly written by introverts, sending messages to their extrovert friends saying they don't know how to do this. We need to get in touch with them to help them learn how. And if you're already an introvert, it's not going to be as hard. But if you're an extrovert, obviously being at home alone is a real challenge. And the problem is, the risk is that, in addition, that issue that we talked about earlier, when you start focusing just on yourself, you start to ruminate about your life, about the questions, about decisions made, past decisions that weren't good. And that rumination can lead to some real depressive experiences. So it is imperative for people to be mindful that that is a part of their brain being stimulated by circumstances, and that they can shift that side of their shift to the other side of their brain, thinking large. What are you going to do about the election this fall? That's a big deal. We know how important that is. People need to think about ways that they can participate in events that maybe they're virtual right now, but people are phone banking all over the place. If that's something that you want to do, you can definitely feel a part of something bigger. And if you're not technologically savvy, the phone is a perfect opportunity. And, you don't have to wait for somebody to call you. This can be a chance to really make some of the changes that you realize maybe this is an opportunity to see where you can be different. Maybe you need to pick up the phone and call people versus kind of passively waiting. But it's understood that this is a difficult time, and we're certainly not minimizing it.
I have one suggestion to add here. If craving touch when you're alone is an issue because you don't have somebody to hug or a pet to cuddle with or that kind of thing, there is something else you could do, which is to buy a weighted blanket. There is some new and emerging research suggesting that sleeping with a weighted blanket is very good for calming anxiety, for helping with insomnia, and that it can stimulate the release of oxytocin, the cuddle hormone. So you might want to try that. And that's something that you could order and have delivered even during the pandemic. I have no vested interest in this product, by the way.
Let's see. How about this question about faith? Could you talk about faith in this context? In some communities, it is a given. In others, it is almost taboo to talk about it. But faith in a higher power and a sense of purpose informed by that faith seem very strong grounding foundations, but we often do not discuss outside of faith circles.
Who should go first? I've forgotten what order.
This is for you, Lisa.
Okay. Faith is something, obviously, that it can really organize our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas about the future, about the threats that we feel, about the risks, about our vulnerabilities. And we have seen a huge decline in the participation in faith-based activities. And why? Is it contemporaneous with the rise of technology? Has technology taken over where faith used to be, and that has sort of distracted us from looking at things that are deeper with the razzle-dazzle of technology? Perhaps. But there are other people who do not have any organized religion or may not have any faith at all. But the wonder, and I thinking about it, I see it as I'm kind of looking up, I can see in back of me, the wonder of nature and the faith in beauty and in order and in the preservation of ecosystems that bring us the kind of peace and feeling of harmony that we seek in our lives. And the belief that there's something bigger and better and awesome that transcends our personal experiences can very much be triggered by, in a good way, by our engagement with nature. And so religion, faith, communities I've seen have been very involved in faith communities and the activities that they have focused on climate action. And I've also been involved with people who have no faith at all, but have found that the wonder of preserving nature and restoring health to our world is a kind of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, I would add that in terms of eliciting awe and a sense of reverence, another channel for doing that is the arts. Mm-hmm. People find tremendous pleasure and beauty and meaning and wonderment in magnificent pieces of music, paintings, photography, live theater, you name it. So it's really a matter of finding what elicits those feelings for you and engaging in them as much as you can.
And there's so many wonderful ways to do that virtually right now with all of the museums, free tours, and it's easy to get overwhelmed, in fact, with all of the
so many choices.
Exactly. Here is a hot button question that I'm going to throw in here just to mix it up. How has the election of Donald Trump contributed to emotional inflammation as opposed to garden variety anxiety? I ask as an ex-political reporter who is appalled almost every day.
Well, you want to take that, or do you want to take the first stab?
I would say 1,000%. There, I've said it. You go, Lisa.
Yeah, I have to confess, I haven't been the same since November 8, 2016. The trickle down effect of feeling that that there is a chaotic leadership is so profoundly unnerving. we feel this sense that things are out of control. We feel a sense of uncertainty. Let's face it, our leader, president, and the president's family very much are like our own families in the sense of their impact on us. And if you bring a child up in a dysfunctional family where there's a lot of chaos, and where you don't believe that people are telling the truth, and you have evidence that people aren't telling the truth, and you don't trust them, and you feel that, in addition, in this case, institutions and what you have come to rely on are not trustworthy, it's a very unmooring experience. And so I think that we're probably safe to say that most people do not feel as if the course is steady, there's a firm hand on the rudder, and that we understand what our goals are and where we're going. And we also have to recognize that our own, that seeing other people acting in ways that are very upsetting triggers our own sense. Nobody has an entirely peaceful existence, but it triggers our own sense of memories of unpleasant situations and chaos and uncertainty. So I think it's safe to say that there's been a huge uptick in emotional inflammation in the last several years.
As we suggested in the book, it's like living in a house with a leaky roof and a shaky foundation with cracks in the foundation. Mm-hmm. You just do not feel stable under these conditions.
No. I mean, we could have a whole other hour on that alone, I suspect. But let's get to a few more. I think we have time just to do, it looks like people also really want to talk about sort of the takeaways, right? So what can you say about the positive necessary effects of exercise is one, and also would you characterize community service as a tool for promoting emotional health? I think of those sort of in the same way, in that they are good for you.
Well, I think we've already addressed the effects of exercise and how valuable those are. And actually, one of the things that I've been reading in news feeds in the paper is that bike stores can't keep enough bikes in their stores. And I think that's partly because people are craving movement, they're craving fresh air, being out in nature. They're not thinking of it so much as exercise, but there is sort of an inherent need to move. And I think that's one of the things that makes this pandemic so difficult. So it's incredibly valuable in terms of calming emotional inflammation on numerous levels. And as Lisa read from our last passage and suggested earlier, community service is incredibly valuable. And that has been one of the silver linings in this pandemic for me, is just seeing how many people have come forward to do good in the community and to think about other people and give to them. That's a game changer. It changes the lives of so many. Even people who don't receive those benefits start to look at the world differently and look at other people differently in a much more restorative sense. Lisa, what did you want to add?
Was that?
You were going to add something.
Well, I was going to say, but it might be more of a closing statement than the response to what you just said. So if there's another question, Heidi, maybe why don't you address that, and then I'll just... Yeah.
We just had a new one come in, and I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last that we can take here. So could you talk about, I'm sort of torn because there are two questions that I really think we should get to. Can you first say a little bit more about what you just said, Lisa, about the effects, not just from our own emotional inflammation, but from being surrounded by so much emotional inflammation in our society? And then I'm going to leave you with a question that has a little bit to do with what our lives might look like after this pandemic and how we can keep some of these habits So first, if you could just do a little bit more on general emotional societal inflammation.
Let's face it, emotions are very contagious. And what other people are thinking and feeling and saying and exhibiting, because so much of what we pick up on from other people is also through body language. And so we are absorbing so much of what is around us. And particularly as we watch the news and we see things that are disruptive, the feelings that we get begin to mirror the feelings of the people we are watching. And this, it's a survival strategy from the old days, is that a herd can afford an enormous amount of security when we're under threat. But in cases like this, it can also ignite some of the darkest parts of our souls. And that emotional contagion, I think, is one of the most dangerous aspects of what's happening right now, because it stops us from thinking and from recognizing that it's not coming necessarily from us initiated, but it's coming from the outside. And we have to remember that.
Mm-hmm. Is your book more directed at how we can address our own emotional inflammation, or am I sensing that here is our sequel, how to deal with societal emotional inflammation?
So wait, ask that again.
It's very much directed at quelling and relieving your own emotional inflammation, but it has lessons that you can impart to those you love and help them through their own, once you realize that you have different reactor styles. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's really beautiful about this book is that it does cover so many different styles, and it has this vast menu of options and strategies from which you can choose. So it's something that can be shared, and I would actually love to see this book get into the hands of first line responders during this pandemic, because I think it could help them. It's not going to be the solution for them. I worry that we're going to have a mental health pandemic after this one, because people are hurting. That's a heavy thought to leave with. But there are lessons in this book that everybody can benefit from. And so I feel like the more it's shared, the more this is talked about, the more this is normalized, and the more this becomes part of our cultural conversation, the better it's going to be for all of us.
I hear from a lot of people right now who we're all obviously stuck at home, and we're seeing our families or our spouses, partners, whomever we're quarantined with all day long. And I hear a lot of people complaining or, struggling with their partner's anxiety, or with how their partner is responding to this stress, and they've taken it in, and, maybe they're feeling one way, maybe I'm okay, maybe I'm just, trying to get through the day, I'm exercising, whatever, but then my partner is really melting down. So I think there's something there.
Yes, there's definitely something that I don't hear people. I hear people talking about self-care and all the rest, but there is something very, very important that we often leave on the table. And it's simple. It sounds a little bit at first uncomfortable, but boy, once you do it, it is extremely important to sit down on a regular basis. You decide how often, have a family or a debriefing, a family meeting, meaning these are the people that you are with. Sit down, start off with what's working. Talk about the positives so far, and come up with something. And then turn to, here are some things that need to be addressed. Sweeping things under the rug, it just makes things boil over later. It's a trigger later on. It's very important. This is the DMZ. This is the thought DMZ time. And it is very important to take care of each other, because when you're this close, what the other person is doing and feeling and saying and thinking has an effect on you. And remember, this is our chance. We have to be the person we are looking for. The person we are looking for is the person who can turn the temperature down on whatever is happening. So this is an important lesson. Have those family meetings. The more often you do it, the more it will feel the more it will feel comfortable for you, and the more you will see the benefits.
I love that. I need that. Let me just ask this final question, and then I think that will leave us in a good place for you both to leave us with some positive parting thoughts. One person wants to know how she's created all these new habits while she's at home. Her day is starting in a more calm, reflective way. She's reading more, walking. How can we continue these habits, which are good for our mental health? And for some, this may have been an interesting time to develop some new self-care techniques. How can we continue to utilize these once we get back to our normal lives, once this is over?
Stacey, you want to take that first?
I love this question. I think it's a matter of setting different priorities for yourself. I have actually embraced this pandemic with my two sons, one of whom is in his early 20s, the other is a teenager. And they have said things like, we feel like our lives have been put on perpetual pause. One of them said he feels like he's in purgatory, and they're very frustrated. And I've said, look at this as an opportunity for reassessment. This is a chance for course correction in a way. We can look at what's working in our lives. We can look at what we're doing to take care of ourselves. We can look at our goals and our dreams and our hopes and recalibrate them and reprioritize them, and then honor those going forward. It's not going to be easy when the world opens up and a zillion new responsibilities and pressures come back toward us. But I think if we can hold on to some of those essential priorities, both in terms of self-care and in terms of what we want to contribute to the world, I think it will be much better for ourselves and for the world at large.
I want to add just a little bit to that. I've been asked at times how people, obviously those of us sitting here, are in a very privileged position. And people have said, how do you square being in this very privileged position, knowing how much people are suffering? And you can't really square it. These are independent streams of thought. But what we can do is, in our gratitude, what we can, recognizing that so much of what we do individually is counted collectively. The decisions we make drive the market. They influence the people around us. So our individual efforts are so very important in thinking to ourselves that we can honor the people who have lost their lives. We can honor those first responders when we're sitting here feeling comfortable. We can honor the people who are suffering by making the changes, learning the lessons from this pandemic, and making sure that we don't forget them, because we know that the planet is in peril. The pandemic is simply a symptom, and we can honor everyone in the memories of others and thank them, and have true gratitude by making sure that these lessons are carried forth, that we don't forget.
I agree 100%.
Well, we have such gratitude for both of you for having written this tremendous and, yes, very prescient book that is so wonderful and can really provide so much help to people right now. So thank you for creating this book, and thank you to our wonderful audience who's tuned in today. I hope all of you are leaving this event feeling slightly better than when you tuned in. I know I am. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Stacey. And thank you to our wonderful audience. I hope everyone has a great afternoon. And I hope everyone stays well and stays well read.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.